The moment that changed the way I think about retirement happened on an ordinary summer afternoon, at a neighborhood barbecue where the air smelled like charcoal, burgers were sizzling on the grill, kids were running through sprinklers across the yard, and I was casually talking to my neighbor Steve, who had retired about 5 years earlier, when he suddenly said something so unexpected that it made me stop mid-bite with a burger in my hand and stare at him, like I had just heard the most confusing financial statement of my life. Steve leaned back in his chair with the relaxed confidence of someone who no longer has alarms, meetings, deadlines, or Monday mornings to worry about, and said with a calm smile that he was actually doing better financially now in retirement than he ever did while working. And the way he said it was so casual and matter-of-fact that it made the statement sound even more unbelievable, because everything we're taught about money tells us that the moment you stop earning paychecks, your financial life should start shrinking instead of growing. At that moment, my brain tried to reconcile two completely conflicting ideas at the same time, because on one hand I knew Steve wasn't joking and wasn't the kind of guy who exaggerates about money. But on the other hand, the logic simply didn't make sense, because how can someone stop working, stop earning income, stop receiving paychecks every 2 weeks, and somehow end up wealthier than when they were in the middle of their career? So naturally, the first thought that crossed my mind was that maybe Steve had some unique situation that explained it away, like winning the lottery, inheriting a large sum of money, or maybe selling a business that none of us knew about. But as he kept explaining things, I started realizing that his situation wasn't unusual at all, and that there are actually thousands of retirees quietly experiencing the exact same phenomenon across the country, without most people ever realizing it. The more I looked into this strange paradox, the more fascinating it became, because there are retirees waking up every morning without an alarm clock, spending their afternoons playing golf, or walking through parks, or traveling during off-season months when everything is cheaper. And while they are living these slower, more relaxed lives, their investment accounts continue growing and their net worth keeps climbing, even though the traditional paycheck stopped years ago. At first, that sounds almost like a financial myth, because we are conditioned to believe that money only flows into our lives when we trade time for work. But the deeper you dig into the mechanics of retirement finances, the more you begin to see that the system actually works very differently once someone leaves the workforce, and the forces that begin to shape their wealth change in ways that most working people never think about. One of the first and most powerful shifts that happens when someone retires is the dramatic transformation in the way taxes affect their income, because during your working years, the government takes a massive bite out of every dollar you earn before that money ever reaches your bank account, and that bite includes federal income tax, sometimes state income tax, Social Security tax, Medicare tax, and often additional deductions that collectively shrink your take-home pay by a staggering percentage. For many professionals, the combined effect of these taxes can easily remove 30 or 40% of their income, and in higher earning situations, that number can approach 50%, which means that half of the value you created through your work disappears into the tax system before you even have the opportunity to spend or invest it. When retirement begins, that entire dynamic shifts, because instead of receiving a single large salary that is fully exposed to taxation, retirees typically draw income from multiple different sources that are treated very differently by the tax code, and those differences can dramatically lower the amount of money that actually ends up being taxed each year. A retiree might receive part of their income from Social Security, another portion from withdrawals from retirement accounts like a 401k or traditional IRA, and possibly additional income from dividends, rental properties, or other investments. And each of those streams interacts with the tax system in ways that often produce a much lower overall tax burden than the taxes they paid while working full time. To understand how dramatic this change can be, imagine someone who earned $100,000 a year during their career, and after all taxes and deductions, their take-home pay might have landed somewhere around $65,000 or $70,000 depending on where they lived and how their benefits were structured. Now imagine that same person retiring and drawing $60,000 per year from a mix of Social Security and retirement accounts, while benefiting from standard deductions and partial taxation rules that reduce how much of that income actually counts toward their taxable total. In many cases, the result is that although they are spending $60,000 in real life, they may only be taxed as if they earn $28,000 or $30,000, which dramatically lowers their tax bill and effectively allows them to keep far more of the money they are using to support their lifestyle. Another powerful shift occurs in the category of everyday expenses, because when someone leaves the workforce, an entire collection of small but persistent costs quietly disappears from their monthly budget, and those savings add up far more than most people realize. Think about the daily financial friction that comes with maintaining a full-time career, which includes commuting costs like gasoline, car maintenance, parking fees, or public transportation passes that must be purchased month after month simply to get to and from work. Add to that the clothing expenses required to maintain a professional wardrobe, the cost of lunches or quick meals purchased during busy workdays, the coffee stops on the way to the office, and the countless small convenience purchases that accumulate over years without us noticing their true impact. When retirement begins, many of these costs vanish almost instantly because the daily commute disappears, the professional wardrobe stops expanding, lunches are prepared at home, and the lifestyle rhythm becomes slower and less dependent on spending money to save time. Time itself becomes one of the most valuable resources retirees gain because while working full-time, many people feel constant pressure to trade money for convenience. Whether that means ordering takeout instead of cooking, hiring someone to mow the lawn instead of doing it themselves, or paying for services that eliminate small tasks from an already busy schedule. Once retirement begins, that time pressure dissolves and many retirees rediscover the satisfaction of doing simple things themselves like cooking meals, gardening, maintaining their homes, or working on personal projects that once felt impossible to fit into their schedules. Each of these activities quietly reduces expenses while also creating a lifestyle that feels slower and more intentional, which means retirees often find themselves spending less money without feeling like they are sacrificing quality of life. Perhaps the most powerful force working behind the scenes during retirement, however, is compound growth, which is one of the most fascinating and misunderstood concepts in the world of investing, because it behaves in ways that can feel almost invisible during the early stages of a career but becomes incredibly powerful over long periods of time. During the first decades of saving for retirement, most people contribute money to their investment accounts month after month, while watching the balances grow slowly, and sometimes frustratingly because the investment gains during those early years appear modest compared to the effort required to earn and deposit the money. But compound growth behaves like a snowball rolling downhill, because the larger the snowball becomes, the faster it grows as each layer of accumulated gains begins generating its own additional growth in the years that follow. By the time someone reaches their 60s, their investment portfolio may have been compounding for 30 or 40 years, which means dividends have been reinvested, interest has been building on previous interest, and market gains have expanded the base from which future gains are calculated. The result is that many retirees reach the end of their careers with portfolios that are significantly larger than the total amount of money they personally contributed, because the majority of the growth came from decades of compounding rather than direct deposits from their paychecks. What surprises many people is that this compounding process does not stop when retirement begins, because as long as the investments remain in the market and withdrawals are kept within reasonable limits, the remaining balance continues generating growth year after year. That means retirees can withdraw money to fund their lifestyle, while the rest of the portfolio keeps expanding, which sometimes results in a situation where their overall net worth actually increases, even while they are no longer earning employment income. Another key piece of the retirement puzzle comes from Social Security, which, despite constant political debate, remains one of the most reliable lifetime income systems ever created, and provides a steady monthly payment that many retirees use to cover a large portion of their essential living expenses. Because Social Security payments continue for life and increase gradually with inflation adjustments, they create a stable financial foundation that reduces how much retirees need to withdraw from their investment accounts each year. This stability acts like a protective shield around retirement portfolios, because when fewer withdrawals are required, the remaining investments have more time and opportunity to grow, which further strengthens the financial position of the retiree over time. Healthcare costs also shift dramatically once retirees reach the age of 65 and become eligible for Medicare, because before that age, many early retirees must rely on private health insurance plans that can cost thousands of dollars per month for couples who are no longer receiving employer-sponsored coverage. When Medicare becomes available, those premiums often drop substantially, which frees up a significant portion of the monthly budget and allows retirees to redirect that money towards savings, investments, or simply enjoying a more comfortable lifestyle. Housing decisions also play a powerful role in shaping retirement finances, because many retirees spend decades living in larger homes that were originally chosen to accommodate growing families, but later become unnecessary once children move out and the household shrinks. When retirees decide to downsize by selling a larger home and purchasing a smaller property, they often unlock hundreds of thousands of dollars in home equity, which can be reinvested or used to strengthen their financial security during the later stages of life. The combined effect of lower taxes, reduced expenses, decades of compound investment growth, stable income streams like Social Security, lower healthcare costs through Medicare, and strategic housing decisions can create a surprisingly powerful financial environment where wealth continues growing even after traditional employment ends. That is why someone like Steve can sit at a backyard barbecue with a relaxed smile and confidently say that retirement turned out to be one of the most financially stable and rewarding periods of his life because the system he spent decades building finally reached the stage where momentum began working in his favor instead of against him. And the deeper lesson hidden inside this story is not simply about retirement itself, but about the incredible power of long-term financial habits, because the small decisions people make throughout their working years about saving, investing, avoiding unnecessary debt, and living within their means quietly built the foundation that makes this entire phenomenon possible decades later. When those habits are repeated consistently over time, they create a financial structure that continues supporting and growing wealth even after the paychecks stop arriving, which turns retirement from something many people fear into something that can actually become one of the most financially secure chapters of a person's entire life. The strange realization that began during that simple conversation at a summer barbecue kept echoing in my mind for days afterward, because the more I thought about Steve's calm confidence when he said he was doing better financially in retirement than when he was working, the more it forced me to question the deeply ingrained belief that earning a paycheck is the only engine that can power a person's financial life forward. That belief is so deeply embedded in modern culture that most people never even stop to question it, because from the moment we enter adulthood, the narrative is simple and relentless, which says that you work hard, earn money, pay bills, and then someday when the paychecks stop, your financial life slowly winds down like a machine, losing power. But the truth hidden beneath that narrative is that money behaves very differently when it is allowed to work independently of human labor, because investments, assets, and financial systems have the ability to generate growth in ways that continue long after the individual stops actively participating in the workforce. This concept is difficult for many people to visualize, because most of our early experiences with money involve trading time for wages, which creates the impression that income and effort must always move together like two gears locked in place. Yet the entire philosophy behind long-term investing is built on the idea that money can become a self-propelling system once it reaches a certain level of scale and momentum, and retirement is often the moment when that system finally becomes visible in its full strength. Imagine for a moment that throughout your working life, every dollar you saved was quietly planting a seed somewhere in the financial soil, and those seeds slowly grew into trees that produced fruit each year whether you were actively working or not. At first, the orchard would look small and unimpressive because young trees take years before they begin producing meaningful harvests, but if you continued planting seeds consistently year after year, eventually the orchard would become large enough that the fruit produced each season could feed you indefinitely without needing to plant new trees. That orchard is exactly what a well-constructed investment portfolio represents, because every contribution made during a career adds another small tree to the landscape, and every reinvested dividend or interest payment strengthens the roots of that system. By the time retirement arrives, many people have spent decades nurturing that orchard without fully realizing how powerful it has become until the moment they finally step back and see how much fruit it is capable of producing on its own. This is why the final years before retirement often become the most financially transformative period in a person's life, because the compounding engine that once felt slow and underwhelming suddenly begins accelerating at a pace that surprises even disciplined investors. Portfolios that once grew by a few $1,000s each year can suddenly begin increasing by tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands, depending on market conditions, because the base of invested capital has become so large that small percentage changes translate into dramatic dollar amounts. That acceleration creates a powerful psychological shift, because individuals who once believed their financial security depended entirely on their next paycheck begin realizing that their investments are now producing growth that rivals or even exceeds the income they once earned from working. For someone like Steve, that realization likely occurred gradually as he watched his portfolio statements over the years and noticed that, even during retirement withdrawals, the overall balance sometimes continued to climb due to market performance and reinvested returns. It is a strange and almost surreal experience when the system you spent decades feeding suddenly begins feeding you in return, because the direction of financial energy flips, and the role of work in your life begins shrinking while the role of accumulated capital expands. Another factor that quietly strengthens the system during retirement is the concept of spending efficiency, which refers to the way people naturally adjust their lifestyle when the pressures of career-driven consumption disappear. During working years, many expenses are tied directly to the identity and pace of professional life, which means individuals often spend money not only to maintain convenience, but also to maintain appearances within social and professional environments. Clothing must remain updated to match workplace expectations. Vehicles are often upgraded to reflect career success. Dining out becomes a common social activity tied to networking or work schedules, and countless purchases are justified as necessary tools for productivity. When retirement arrives, those subtle pressures dissolve because there are no longer offices to impress, meetings to attend, or professional hierarchies to navigate, which allows many retirees to simplify their consumption habits in ways that feel liberating rather than restrictive. The absence of these pressures often leads to a lifestyle where experiences replace appearances, and personal satisfaction replaces professional signaling, which can dramatically lower spending without reducing happiness. A retiree may choose to spend mornings walking through a park instead of commuting through traffic, afternoons reading or gardening instead of attending meetings, and evenings cooking meals at home instead of rushing through expensive restaurants between work commitments. These shifts may appear small when viewed individually, but together they create a financial environment where money remains in the household, rather than flowing outward to sustain a lifestyle built around work. Over time, this reduced spending amplifies the power of investment growth because every dollar that is not spent becomes another dollar that can remain invested and continue generating returns. Another powerful yet often overlooked factor in retirement wealth is the psychological transition from accumulation to preservation, which changes the way individuals think about risk, spending, and financial decision-making. During working years, people often focus on increasing income and building assets, which can sometimes encourage aggressive financial behavior such as high leverage, speculative investments, or lifestyle inflation driven by rising salaries. Once retirement begins, the mindset shifts toward protecting what has already been built, which often leads to more conservative spending habits and thoughtful financial planning that further stabilizes long-term wealth. This change in perspective can act as a natural safeguard against reckless financial decisions, because retirees are typically more aware that their existing assets must sustain them for the remainder of their lives, which encourages careful management of both investments and expenses. In addition to these internal shifts, retirees often discover new opportunities for small streams of income that were never possible during their working years, simply because they now possess both the time and the experience to explore activities that were once sidelined by demanding careers. Some retirees begin consulting within their previous industries for a few hours each week, sharing decades of expertise with younger professionals who are eager to learn from someone who has already navigated the challenges they now face. Others turn hobbies into modest income sources by selling handmade crafts, offering online courses, writing books, teaching community workshops, or participating in small entrepreneurial ventures that provide both intellectual stimulation and additional cash flow. The remarkable aspect of these activities is that the income they generate often feels less like work and more like creative expression, because retirees are free to pursue projects that genuinely interest them rather than those dictated by corporate structures or financial necessity. Since their basic living expenses are already supported by retirement savings and Social Security, any extra income produced by these activities often flows directly into savings or investments, which further strengthens their financial position. Another subtle advantage retirees possess is the flexibility to structure their financial decisions around time rather than urgency, because they are no longer bound by the rigid schedules that dominate working life. This flexibility allows them to travel during off-peak seasons, when flights and accommodations are dramatically cheaper, shop for goods and services when discounts are available, and plan purchases with patience rather than making expensive last-minute decisions driven by busy work schedules. Over years, these strategic choices compound into meaningful savings that help preserve and grow wealth even without significant income. Additionally, many retirees eventually experience financial windfalls that were not included in their original retirement planning, such as inheritances from older family members, the sale of long-held assets like rental properties or business interests, or unexpected market gains from investments that appreciated significantly over time. While these events vary widely from person to person, they often occur during the later stages of life when individuals are already financially stable, which means the additional resources can dramatically increase net worth without requiring additional effort. When all these factors converge, the result is a financial landscape that looks radically different from the one most people imagine when they think about retirement, because instead of a slow depletion of resources, many retirees experience a period of surprising stability or even continued wealth expansion. This does not mean retirement automatically guarantees financial prosperity, because the system only works when individuals have spent years or decades building a strong foundation through disciplined saving, thoughtful investing, and responsible spending habits. However, for those who have followed that path, retirement can become a phase where the momentum of past decisions finally reveals its full power, and the financial machine they constructed over a life. Time continues running smoothly even after they step away from the workforce. That realization transforms the entire emotional experience of retirement, because instead of fearing the loss of paychecks, individuals begin seeing their accumulated wealth as a living system capable of supporting them through the decades ahead. It is the moment when money transitions from something that must constantly be chased through work into something that quietly works on your behalf behind the scenes, allowing time, freedom, and personal fulfillment to become the central focus of life. And when you step back and look at the full picture, it becomes clear that the true secret behind retirees becoming wealthier is not a mysterious financial trick or hidden loophole, but the simple yet powerful result of decades of consistent decisions finally reaching the stage where their effects compound together into something far greater than the individual actions that created them.